Hello and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 5th of December 2025. I want to begin this podcast by thanking all of you who reached out in the last week to wish Sarah well for her operation, which took place this week. And I can report that I was speaking to her today. Her operation went well yesterday. She is recovering. She's sorry she can't be here. She'll be back before Christmas, but she needs to take a week or two to rest and recover. So the news on that front is all good. And the even better news is that we have secured a more than capable replacement for this week. I am joined by barrister, human rights campaigner, founder of the Contest.ie, and just this week, the founder of a new organisation called the Women's Coalition on Immigration, Ms. Laoise de Brún. Laoise, hi, how are you?
Hi, great to be here, John. Lovely to see you.
Well, thank you for stepping into the breach, as they say, and it's great to have you with us. So there's a lot of stuff that happened this week. President Zelensky was here for a visit. The Dublin City Council had their arm twisted to cancel for now their plans to rename Herzog Park in Dublin. The government had more developments on its housing policy, which I revealed in the story in Gript yesterday morning on Thursday, which I'll talk about a little bit. But let's start with you, because you had a busy time of it. You were, last time I saw you, you were off in Brussels. You were telling the Europeans all about the dangers of surrogacy. Then you were in Washington, D.C., and I think I saw you meeting Harmeet Gill in the U.S. Isn't she Assistant Attorney General? And then, of course, on Tuesday, you popped up as the head of this new Women's Coalition on Immigration. So we'll start with the latter one, because that's what happened this week. Tell me all about the Women's Coalition on Immigration, what it's about and why you did it.
To be quite honest with you, I have had the same embodied, triggered reaction emotionally and mentally to the current immigration policies that I had in kind of 2018 onwards vis-a-vis trans ideology. And it was very much the sense of an existential threat to fundamental rights, and the fact that the mainstream media was going along with it, and the fact that levers were very much being pulled to keep people in line. So with regard to trans ideology, you mustn't dare say anything or think anything that's transphobic. And with regard to immigration policies, certain aspects of them, there's a sense that you mustn't have concerns or fears or voice them lest you be labeled a racist or a bigot or far right. And I just saw the same playbook being played out. And as a women's rights campaigner, I do see things through the lens of women's rights and child safeguarding and child protection. And for some time now, I have been commenting, actually. I did write an article for Compact magazine, which is a magazine that's published out of New York. Apparently, J.D. Vance read it. Who knows if he read my article, but it went down very well. And then I was mentioning it in speeches, and at the Women's Declaration International Conference in London, I said that I thought that not only trans, but also mass immigration, they were both existential threats to the rights and freedoms of women and girls in Europe. And I got a standing ovation. Well, not a full standing ovation, because there is still an issue there with socialist feminists. And certainly you can see that playing out in Ireland, that strand of thought that says we have to be compassionate, and that seems to be taking precedence over safeguarded concerns. So essentially, this was kind of coming to the fore all the time for me. And what I decided to do, I looked at the space and I kind of analysed it, and I said it was very male dominated, and it was coming across as quite angry. And my sort of activism is very policy driven, I would say. I mean, I'm pretty punchy. I'm punchy in my activism, but it's very much about providing practical policy alternatives. So I decided to create a women's coalition and bring very strong, articulate, clever women together and host an event. So we had the event this week in Buswells, and unfortunately it clashed perfectly with the Zelensky joint Oireachtas briefing or speech or whatever. But
it's down to the minute, I think.
Well.
Down to the minute, I think.
Yeah, I know. Well, initially we were thinking, oh, amazing, they'll be done and dusted, and then we can tempt them over across the road to us. But who knows if they would have come anyway, because as you have discussed on this podcast, there's a very narrow Overton window in Ireland when it comes to what is acceptable to say and what's not acceptable to say. And honestly, I think there's even more fear in the general public about being seen to be racist than there was about being seen to be transphobic. Um, but at the same level, on the other hand, it's affecting more people's lives on a daily basis. I think we're at a tipping point. And so anyway, what I decided to do was take a random sample of 6 European member states and drill down into their criminal statistics. And the results were pretty stark. Non-national men are 3 to 4 times more likely, or not more likely, it's not propensity, it's an actual fact. They are overrepresented in criminal statistics. This is official data from either the police forces of those countries or the ministries of justice. And what they show is that non-national men in those countries are overrepresented by a factor of 3 to 4 in sexual offending statistics versus native men of those countries, be that country Germany, Austria, Sweden, Finland, and so on. And actually, when you look into specific regions of the world and specific crimes, it's even worse. So, for instance, with regard to gang rape, offenders from the MENAC region, which is North, I always get this wrong, Middle East, North Africa, Pakistan, and Turkey. It's an acronym. If you're looking at that region, sometimes it's an overrepresentation of a factor of 10 or 20. So
Okay. No, but I'm going to interrupt you there because, well, first of all, this is a conversation, not an interview. But so I look at this and sorry, that wasn't a dig in any way, shape, or form. It's just that
used to being interviewed.
yeah. Here's the thing, if I was to play devil's advocate, and I am very clearly here, by the way, playing devil's advocate, because I have written on this, and I have written in the past about, for example, the culture clash of somebody of sheer attitudes towards sex crimes in countries like Algeria versus countries from here. And I talked about the culture clash of people coming from one culture into another, and how you've got to expect that they'll take some elements and attitudes from their own culture with them. Indeed, the left tells us as much, right? The left tells us that diversity is all about that. It's about a melding of cultures, and it's about enrichment and bringing the positive aspects of your culture to the new nation. But obviously, if you bring the positive aspects of your culture, you can't expect that negative aspects of your culture won't come with you as well. But for argument's sake, you say that people are overrepresented in the sex crime statistics based on their nationality. You also have to take into account, don't you, that people who come here as migrants are generally in impoverished and in the poorer stratas of society. So is the appropriate comparison not with, for example, between, migrants and, if you were looking at Ireland, people from working class deprived communities? Because if you only looked at people, and you're a barrister, you know this, if you only looked at Ireland and only looked at Irish people, you would say that when it comes to certain criminal offences, including sex crimes, people from deprived backgrounds are significantly overrepresented compared to people from privileged or middle class backgrounds. So isn't there an overlap there?
I mean, that's why the criminal bar is essentially funded by free legal aid, whereas there's very little private work in criminal law other than drink driving. I mean, that's borne out by the realities. So yes, but I still think it holds true. So yes, this population, and when you look at the statistics, that's often said in these countries, in terms of the random sample, like they are socialist democracies, they have that sensibility. And often when you look at the statistic, they'll say things like, oh, socioeconomic factors, alienation in the host country. So they're trying to bring that kind of criminological sensibility to it. But the point is, international applicants, 80% of them are economic migrants, but they just don't have the skills or the education or training to acquire visas. So you are still looking at a population that is, a better example is there was a Swedish longitudinal study. And I mean, what it showed was that if you came to Sweden under 15, your criminal offending, your pattern of criminal offending was more in tune with the native one for males. Whereas if you came after 15, your own cultural values sort of had already taken hold. So it is an intersection of, as you say, class, also culture and values, and it's really nothing to do with racism at all or anyone's skin color.
Well,
It's
you're out here. You're out here, and you're making like the most explosive charge on immigration that can be made. Essentially, you're saying we're coming together as a group of women because immigration is a specific threat to women in a way that it's not to men, because specifically women are put at risk of sex crime. That's
yeah.
essentially the case. Um, like that is. I mean, so what is your solution to that? Because surely the logical extension of that is another. Well, it's not another, but it's a very extreme position, which is that we should basically allow no immigration at all. Because if you're applying this across the board, then that basically says that of every 10, 15 migrants you let into the country, one is a risk to women, or whatever the figures are. Isn't the effective logic of your position an end to all immigration completely? I mean, what is, I guess what I ask you about the Women's Coalition on Immigration is what are its policy demands from the government?
So in the immediate term, it would be to record mandatory recording on the pulse system of ethnicity and country of origin. That could be done tomorrow. That just needs an order from the minister to the commissioner, and then that should be released. We should be able to see that data as they have done in other countries. I mean, one of the mandatory recommendations of the Baroness Casey report, interim report into 500 cases of grooming of rape gangs in the UK, said that withholding information and downplaying correlations was done because of political correctness. It was done because nobody wanted to be seen to be racist. However, what it ended up doing was eroding trust in all the institutions. So like we are at a precipice here in Ireland where we can go one of two ways. We can just continue with this kind of wishful thinking, hoping that it'll all be grand. It's not going to be grand. I mean, I feel like it's an experiment really. And, some things are just so reckless in my view. Like, why would you put any population of men who nobody knows who they are, where they're from, en masse into residential areas? I mean, I don't see how you would, how that's sensible. And then on top of that, if they're from cultures where there is a very obvious correlation with a much higher rate of sex offending.
Well, I don't know if there's a much higher rate of sex offending, because I know that they record the rate of sex offending in countries like Algeria, or whether I think isn't the issue that
Host countries, when they come to host countries.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, okay, it's a fascinating area, and I think it's interesting that is being raised in the context of specifically women, and we'll follow its developments with interest. But anyway, tell me about, before that, you were over in Brussels talking about surrogacy. Why are you talking about that?
Well, I don't think people in Ireland are fully aware of our new legislative framework. And it's a really good case study in how the media manage the official narrative in this country. Because, again, very like trans, the kind of soft, cuddly, hard to argue with case studies are all rolled out. Like it's a kind of a brilliant study in lobbying and lobbying successfully. The different pressure groups would bring their own children in to meet ministers, offer photos with the ministers. They've said this openly. And we were both interviewed by a Spanish political newspaper, and that's what their piece said. And it worked. So I was involved in the briefing the Oireachtas, a brief the Oireachtas when it was moving through the houses. There was a few amendments, but tabled, but they're all voted.
Bring this back to first principles. So the new Irish surrogacy laws.
Ireland has brought in quite radical surrogacy laws whereby it is legal to commission a baby if it's done altruistically. So if you don't pay someone a fee, but if you cover all their expenses, that is very difficult to quantify. And very typically, poor women will be the ones becoming surrogate mothers. But also it's legal to commission a baby from abroad commercially. So there's already a two-tier aspect to it. Also, you can, a single man of 21 and above can commission a baby in Ireland today. I've said that to a few people, and two different people, when I told them, got kind of teary-eyed. They just couldn't believe how disconnected to our own values we have drifted,
Yeah, but does that not, and again, playing devil's advocate here, does that not like make a certain inherent sense? I mean, if you're going to give people like, because I mean, I think when a lot of people come to this issue of surrogacy, they draw lines all over the place, right? They're kind of like, well, look, if you're a childless couple in your 30s and you're really desperate to have a child, and your wife's sister is willing to carry that baby for you, then what business does it of the states? And they kind of start with that example in their heads, and they go, well, that's fair enough. But once you bring in the law, once you regulate this kind of thing in law, and you're saying people have the right to, as you say, commission in inverted commas children, then why stop at 21? I mean, why doesn't every adult have the same right? Why doesn't an 18-year-old have a right to go out and, engage somebody if they're two consenting adults to carry a child for him? Or indeed, if he's got the money, he's won the Euro Millions or something, he's 18,
You're
to
not
go and
actually
commission
serious, are
some
you?
woman. Hmm?
Are you actually serious?
No, I'm making the argument from the point of view of the problem I always think with a lot of laws that liberals enact is that they start with the hard case, but once you enact that law, once you actually put it into a legal framework, there's no logical reason why any adult who desires a child should be denied the right to have one just because they don't fit some arbitrary set of criteria in their life that people think about when they're engaged in thinking about surrogacy. That's the
No,
point
I
I'm
see
making.
that point. I see that point. So what you're saying is that if we are prepared to create a new framework whereby people who want to have children and can afford to are entitled. It's a right to have a baby, and you've a right to rent a womb, and you've a right to buy that baby, and essentially traffic that baby if it's across borders, because you want to, and that baby can't consent. Like when I spoke at the conference addressing the European Union, the special rapporteur for violence against women and girls, Rima Salim, spoke, and she's just done the first ever, unbelievably actually, the first ever UN report into surrogacy. And essentially, she's got one key conclusion, which is she wants it abolished all over the world. And there's growing consensus around that in Europe. And sort of typically in Ireland, we've kind of gone headlong this way, just as there's growing awareness and consensus in the other direction. I don't know why that happens, but we seem to just be still running the lap in that direction when, it's there's a sort of shift in awareness. But she says in a report that, like, regardless if the person is paid a fee or just expenses, the separation from the mother is a violence and does harm that can never be, it can't be mitigated against. So the trauma to the mother and the damage to the baby is profound. And I think, I think we know that. It's just that there's lots of vested interest and wealthy couples who want to do this. And so it's happened. It is now our law.
So I always come at this from a kind of, you're a lawyer, you'll know what I'm talking about. I always come at this from the concept of informed consent, because I always think you're in a really bad area if you start messing with the biological imperatives of
Mm.
humanity.
Yeah.
And so I can easily envisage a situation where you are a 24-year-old Eastern European woman who desperately needs money and thinks to yourself, I could do surrogacy, could absolutely do surrogacy. And you sign a contract with a wealthy Western couple and you agree to have their child, thinking this will be relatively easy. And you aren't aware, because you're 24, and sometimes maybe even if you're 44, that the human body and millennia of evolution have imbued in you something you're not even aware that will happen to you yet, which is that when you actually go through the process of giving birth to that child and it comes out of you and you look at it, a bond of the most deepest psychological nature will be formed. And you may not be in a position, you may see that child and realize that it's your child, you've carried it for 9 months and you really want it, and all of a sudden the state is then in a position of enforcing a civil contract where the child that's just come out of your body isn't yours at all. I think that is probably the most horrifying thing that the state could do to a woman. And that is why I oppose surrogacy in all its forms, because I think you are messing with and you're putting a legal barrier between the most natural bond that human beings form. And
Well,
you're basically turning the woman potentially. And I recognize, by the way, this thing when you're talking about laws with this, that not everyone is the same, and there will of course be those women for whom giving up the child is no problem at all, costs
mm,
them no pain. They just hand it over and they take their check, and they really were able to deal with it. But I think those cases where it happens that a woman experiences that bond with her child, and then it is the state and the courts coming in to manually and forcibly sever that bond and say, no, you signed a contract, you have to abide by it, is just about the most horrifying vista in terms of abusing the law that I can imagine occurring anywhere. That's what I think about it. But then on the other side of this, when you say about the law as it stands in Ireland, I mean, a lot of people will surely look at this and kind of, because people don't think about this really, and they will think, well, if you're a couple in Ireland and if you're in a position where you know my wife and I don't have any children, and we decided one day that we really, really, really wanted to have them, and it's not possible for us. I mean, what? And somebody is willing to have that child for us, and somebody is willing to do it. Then why should the state step into it? I mean, that's what people think, right? That's what they think. So how are you going to go and combat that 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 instinct?
yeah, I mean, I think you're right insofar as it's done now. It is enacted, and the narrative has been managed so tightly that, like, even those kind of, the way, like, with trans women or women, well, it's kind of, I don't know, vapid and axiomatic. And in the same way, like, people have said to me, it's surely it's just another way to have a baby, just another way to have a family. Um, and so I think that when there's kind of those slogans pushed out, people don't really think beyond them. Um, and obviously, the baby in the middle of it all can't speak up and go, I want to stay with my mother, or the person I believe to be my mother, the only human being I know. Like, it is barbaric to pull that child out of a woman and put it on to someone else's chest. And, you know, um, yeah, to me, it's like, it's the twin soul of transhumanism. There's something on a spiritual level I'm just so uncomfortable with. It's kind of unlatching us from our humanity, isn't it?
Well, that's my view on it. I don't think regular viewers will know and listeners will know that I don't think about these things in spiritual terms, because I'm a spiritual void of a human being. But I do think about it in terms of I think a lot of what we call spirituality is actually deeply ingrained evolutionary biology, and I think that is why the agony and pain resonates so much when you think. I mean, the thing that bugs me about this is that we know the consequences of this kind of thing in our own country. We know the consequences of it because at the very same time as we are doing this, the very same time as we are saying it is legitimate to go to, and it's often Ukraine, go to Ukraine and convince some young woman to have your child for money and then hand it over and sever her entire legal rights to it. We are horrified at what happened in our own mother and baby homes, where women were convinced to go in, and because of this, not for any financial reward, but like for essentially social rehabilitation, go into mother and baby homes, give up their children, sign them over to America, sign over their legal rights to it. And we know now we're living with the consequences of that and the pain and agony that was inflicted on some people. Not everyone involved in that. That's the other thing. Not everyone involved in that process. There are stories of mother and baby homes of women who happily gave up their children, and children who were happily adopted into American families and one and lived amazing lives, as there will be with surrogacy. But when it comes to the individuals for whom that was traumatic, we're having bloody tribunals into the trauma now, at the same time as we are putting a legal framework around doing the exact same thing in a slightly different way a couple of generations later. I mean, to me, it is utterly absurd.
And also, wasn't there a few survivors? Um, I don't know what happened to them, but they were camped outside Leinster House on hunger strike. So, like, we are so far away from any closure in terms of that open, festering sore.
I got a lot
Uh,
of emails about that, and
but I mean, what happened afterwards? Like, were they did I just felt they were being ignored. I mean, to me, it really showed. I don't
I'll
know
be honest, I
what the
ignored
machine
them.
really thinks of them. You know.
I ignored them. I got a lot of emails about this, like, why are you ignoring this story of the people on hunger strike? And people deserve an explanation for that. And that is that, I had immense sympathy with their position, Alicia. I thought their position was completely correct. But to me, when you engage in a hunger strike, that's it. I'm not interested anymore, because a hunger strike is a form of moral blackmail. You are basically saying, if if the state or if you do not enact my wishes, I will harm myself. And I know you have children, and I think that if you had one of your children who came home to you and said, um, I've got this boyfriend or I've got this girlfriend, and they're saying that if I don't stay with them, they'll harm themselves. You would not be advising your child that their duty is to stay with that person to prevent them from harming themselves. And I think it's the same thing in public policy. I don't want to put that in the record. That is why I didn't cover that story, because it is my strong view that hunger strikes are one of the worst things that you can do, and it's one of the worst things that we can reward. If you tell people, I don't care how much I agree with the people committing the hunger strike, if you're saying, I want something to happen, and if it doesn't happen, I'm going to harm myself, then to me, you're engaged in the worst form of moral blackmail that is deeply unfair to whoever you're asking the question of. And I just don't think it's something that should be ever countenanced. And that's my view. So I didn't cover that story.
Does that stem from the hunger strikers like Bobby Sands? Like, if what? Why?
It stems from all of them, because I mean, the thing is, if you extend the logic, let's take the example of Mr. Sands, who went on hunger strike because he wanted status as a political prisoner. And let's imagine that the British government had immediately said, well, absolutely, you can have that, and you don't need to starve yourself anymore. Well, what is the position then if 100,000? Actually, let's flip this, because people sometimes think about it in terms of their own terms. Let's imagine there was a United Ireland in the morning, or there was a referendum on the United Ireland in the morning, and 100,000 unionist and loyalist men said, we are all going on hunger strike and we will all kill ourselves by starvation until this referendum is cancelled. In that case, do you think that the
That's
Irish
how
people
it
should give up their
happens.
right to United Ireland just to save 100,000 lives? That is the logic of it, because if it works once, then you can do it en masse. And you're basically saying that I'm going to hold the rest of the world hostage, or kill myself if I don't get my way. I think it is immensely illegitimate, regardless of who does it.
It's funny. I don't think of it like that at all. I think that it shows, in the case of those elderly ladies, pure desperation. I mean, who would do that to themselves unless they had no power and no levers to pull and had tried everything
Sure.
else? And sure, they've been onto their TDs and all the rest. I mean, it was an absolute kind of course of action of last resort.
But of
Um,
course, I mean, I'm not disputing that it's a course of action or last resort,
I
or that
don't.
it's pure
So what
desperation.
you're saying is it's analogous to a coercive control relationship, but that's two
Of course it
individuals who
is.
are on par, whereas the state is not in an emotional relationship with these human beings to whom it owes a duty of care, be they, um, in the care or custody of the state, in the case of political prisoners during the Troubles, or be they victims of state care who haven't like, I mean, to me, their demands were so like conservative. They just wanted bloody medical cards, John. I mean, the fact that, to me, it shows how vindictive the state is and how carefully choreographed the whole so-called reckoning with the mother and baby homes was. I mean, I kind of, very early days in Countess, I sort of blindly walked into that, and my God, like, it's such a quagmire. There's so many layers of shame, pain, trauma. As you say, it's complex. Like, there's some women who never want to be reunited and haven't told the man they went on to marry that they had one of these babies. There's layers of complexity and trauma. Because I remember you remember the whole scandal about burying the files. Do you remember that when Roderick O'Gorman was like rolled out to
Hmm.
do that, and there was uproar, but there was lots of different like um agencies and NGOs and groups involved, and there was a sense from some of the survivors that they were kind of being managed by, say, middle-class academics who were speaking for them, and they'd lost their agency in it all. And I remember very early days, I wasn't on the Twitter very long in terms of being on the Countess Twitter handle, which I used to do every day. And I remember like just the amount of like blowback and flack from all angles. So, I mean, it's incredibly complex, but I do remember I kept in touch with some of the survivor groups, and when I did that campaign, when we did that campaign, these words belong to us. Do you remember that about when we stopped the government removing the word woman from maternity legislation? But survivors came to us and said, we want to be involved in this, which was a huge like testament to the trust that they had in us. But I do think like when the so-called apology happened and everything, like they told me that they hadn't even seen the document. They were sent a Zoom link. A lot of them weren't able to access it. Like the whole thing was managed and choreographed, and it's that classic thing of limit the damage, like sort of create the scope, create the parameters, limit the damage, protect the state, and move on. And clearly it hasn't been done well if elderly ladies are camped out on the pavement outside Leinster
No, I
House.
agree with all of that. I
mean-
agree with absolutely all of that. Everything you've said, I agree with. The one thing I'm not going to budge on, though, is the legitimacy of starving yourself to obtain a political aim. Because you said it to me, is it a coercive control thing? It is a coercive control thing. That's what you're trying to do. You are trying to coerce the state to do something that you want to do by threatening to harm yourself. Now, you've said, and I think you make a fair point, that the state has a duty of care, maybe that a boyfriend doesn't have to a girlfriend who's saying she'll harm herself if he breaks up. I accept that. But the state is also all of us. And when you concede the principle that a small group in society can hold everyone else to ransom by threatening to harm themselves, well, the logic of that just explodes right across the board. I mean, like, why, for example, if you flipped the lid, you are somebody who has campaigned very strongly on trans rights. Let's imagine that 5 or 6 trans activists, many of whom I think are quite mentally fragile and quite mentally, vulnerable to this kind of stuff. Let's imagine 5 or 6 of them chained themselves to the railings outside Leinster House and said, we're going on hunger strike until all trans people have access to the bathrooms that they want to enter unconditionally. In that circumstance, do you think that the state, which has a duty of care to them, should just give them their way?
Absolutely not. But I
Well,
mean,
of
I
course
wouldn't
not. But the
see.
mechanism of action is the same, and I would agree with you.
I wouldn't see their demands as legitimate. Whereas I think a woman who's been through the institutions and just wants a mental health, of course I mean, it's almost just so badly managed. Is it incompetence? Is it cruelty? Is it vindictiveness on the part of the state? Like, why? It should never have been allowed get to that stage. Like, why were they being engaged with? I don't understand why they don't have, considering we have apparently gone through some kind of great come to Jesus moment as a collective. Why don't they have some kind of liaison? I mean, it just seems like an absolute, like, I don't know.
I agree with you on all that. I'm not even going to mount an argument, because I genuinely, and I hope listeners understand, I'm sure you do, I'm not disagreeing with Leisha at all on her comments re the treatment of victims of these institutions. But I did want to clarify that, because I've had some people email and go, well, why haven't you covered it? And that's the straightforward, ask an honest question, get an honest answer. So we've covered immigration, we've covered surrogacy, we've now randomly covered hunger strikes. Why were you in America talking to Harmeet Dillon?
Well, it's a funny story. Well, it's a kind of an odd story. When I was campaigning against the constitutional amendments that the government fully expected to get through last year in the referendums, one which would have collapsed the meaning of motherhood and mothers and what they do and the recognition and rights, and the other one that would have collapsed the meaning of marriage or the family rather. I ended up at a lunch with 2 American Republicans, and I just sat down and started ranting, as I do sometimes. And one of them said, "Oh my God, we have got to get you on American television." And the other one was said, "Let me phone Harmeet," who she'd gone to law school with. And Harmeet Dillon was the reason I got onto Tucker. And when I did a 20-minute interview with Tucker on Tucker Carlson Network, when at the time of the referendum, because he was really, really interested in the fact that we had a written referendum like the US, but ours said this extraordinary thing to women.
Written
officially
constitution.
from the state. Yeah. To this day, I think it's the most radical, beautiful statement of appreciation and recognition. So then through that, I have basically kept in touch with Harmeet. I'm a big fan of hers. I've been just watching her work closely. And she and her eye. And she wanted to meet me to talk about what I'm doing on the ground in Ireland, because like you've already spoke about a few of the different issues, you know, the Countess, trans ideology, all of that, then surrogacy, and now immigration. I'm like Mrs. Rabbit and Peppa Pig. Do you know what that reference is? Have you ever seen Peppa Pig? Mrs.
One of the
Rabbit
benefits
is
of not
very
having
clear.
children. I have nieces. And all they
Okay,
talk about is
If
Peppa.
you ever are held hostage by your nieces and you have to sit down and watch Peppa Pig, who's a very, very, very English little character, a pig, obviously. Like wherever they go, Mrs. Rabbit she's, you know, the cashier in the supermarket, and then they go and she's the taxi driver, and then she's driving the school bus, and like she's just everywhere. So I'm just making a joke. But yeah, so because she sees what I'm doing, or we've stayed in touch, she wanted to meet with me and talk about my conservative activism. It's funny actually, conservatism, you know, I've talked about this a lot, like what is it anymore? What does it really mean? And
Same thing it always meant. Just liberals like you have come in and decided that you're now conservatives and are trying to change what it means.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I find that fascinating. So, like, I was described by the Irish Times as a conservative activist during the time of the referendum, and I nearly collapsed because I was like, what? I am literally, and have been since I was kind of politicized around 17, really the most like liberal person. Like my husband used to say, you know, when all the flack first came towards me when I launched the Countess, he was like, why are they calling you far right? You're like the most socialist of any of them, you know? But the conservatism, yeah, initially I couldn't really handle it because it just felt really strange. But I have not only made peace with it, I see it in a new way. So I think if conserving the rights and freedoms, fundamental rights of women and girls to single-sex spaces and services, and if conserving motherhood as a legal, you know, framework and reality and biological reality and conception, if conserving childhood as a developmental stage characterized by innocence worth protecting, that should be protected, and if conserving you know, women's safety and security and our culture and sovereignty and the nation state, if all of those things make me conservative, then I am a conservative, and you know, proudly so. I just think that it's much broader than religious conservatism or Christian conservatism, or, you know, whether or not you're pro-life. I think it's much broader than that and deeper. And I think that really what the left, in many ways, the left won socially. Like, I think that most people
I don't agree with that.
Like, I think it's normative to have public services provided by the state and the public goods and socialized medicine. That is normative across Europe. And Ireland is lagging behind. We haven't really done it. We didn't build a welfare state after World War II. We kind of handed it over to the religious orders. Cullen did that. And then obviously we handed it over to 34,000 NGOs. But that's kind of just anomalous to Ireland. Like generally in the West, other than say America, that's what states have done. And they've done that because, you know, that's what has been kind of the consensus. And similarly, socially, like if your daughter comes home and says she's a lesbian, or your son comes home and says he's gay, like unless the family are absolutely hardcore evangelical, they don't kick that child out. I mean, there's just is a tolerance for homosexuality.
I think
I would argue, John, most people are pro-choice, but in a very limited way. They're not happy. So this is where I am at around so much of this. Like there's nuance, right? Like I don't want abortion used as a contraceptive. I don't think it's a lifestyle. I don't think it's healthcare. I don't think it's care. You know, like I've thought about this a lot. Like, I grew up in a country where it was illegal, right? One of the last countries in Europe. I think Malta is the only the one left after us.
Oh,
And
no. Do you know what?
where
We'll get on to abortion in a second. I just want to go back on the question of conservatism, because I think it's important.
but this is
Uh,
this is why it's important to sort of say where the markers are today. You know.
like, for me, like, conservatism is much broader than just opposing the left. And I think sometimes my criticism, it's not of you specifically, but definitely not specifically of you, but of a number of kind of, like, of the new right, shall we say, is that it kind of judges by conservatism by how much do you oppose the left. And the more you oppose the left, the more conservative you are. And I don't think that's what conservatism is at all. As somebody who's been a conservative all my life, conservatism is a way of thinking about the world and a way of thinking that society should be ordered. And it's inherent in the name. It is about conserving things that are important to be conserved, but it's also about understanding why you are conserving them. Like, the people think that conservatives exist to oppose all change. That's not true. I mean, the governing law of conservatism, as far as I'm concerned, is something called Chesterton's fence, which is an old story about, if you look at a fence standing in a field and you decide you're going to smash it down, well, you should understand why the fence was there before you take the hammer to it. And a lot of what happens in the West is that we smash these fences down without understanding why they were there in the first place. If something has been happening for generations or centuries or even 40, 50 years, it's probably been done that way for a reason. And until you understand what the reason was, you probably shouldn't change it. And I think that is as true of the right as it is of the left. So one of the reasons I oppose Donald Trump on tariffs, for example, is that if you look at the last 40 years of free trade, and you just kind of go, I don't like free trade and globalization, I'm gonna stick up tariffs because they worked back in the 1920s. Well, then maybe you're not fully appreciating why society moved away from them in the first place. And obviously, the question with the left is, I mean, they smash all kinds of institutions. They smash the family. They smash marriage. They argue that the nuclear family is a bad thing. They, in some cases, they want to undermine an awful lot of social and sexual conventions that society has adhered to for generations, or in some cases centuries, without understanding what the evolutionary biology reasons are for society having adopted those rules in the first place. So I think conservatism is an organized philosophy that says the state should be basically quite small and limited. We should try to maximize individual freedom. We should have respect for non-state institutions that provide moral leadership, like the church or like the GA. And by and large, we should let people live lives that are as free as possible. One of the things that really drives me batty is people on the right who kind of want to ignore that last part and impose their will on society the same way the left do. I don't think that's conservatism at all.
Yeah, and I think as well, the new left, the radical new left, is like this runaway train. I think a lot of people in the old left, like me, I'd see myself as a refugee from the old left, and there's many of us. I mean, I think we're a huge constituency. Like, I understood well the different tools of analysis. What if it was, say, intersectionality, critical race theory, critical theory, feminism. But what has happened is they've become the predominant theory. Like, they've overtaken the whole, conversation. Like, they were only meant to be tools of analysis. So, for instance, like with feminism, I've often said this, it was very silent on motherhood and the importance of motherhood. And like, I've had this argument with radical lesbians, who would say that, they would see motherhood as kind of a tool of
An
oppression.
oppressive institution, yeah.
Yeah. So they're like really old school, second generation radical lesbians, radical feminists who are also lesbians. But I said, and I mean this, that for me, becoming a mother was the greatest self-actualization that I ever experienced. Like, it gave me the steel to do what I do, because there's something about having small children, especially, like, you lose all sense of being able to be made embarrassed. Like, and it's funny, Heather, the evolutionary biologist, Heather Ewing,
McDonald's.
who's married to Brett Weinstein, she says, she has this theory, and it really resonates for me. She says that there's a whole generation of young women, liberal young women, in their 30s who hitherto would have been looking after small toddlers and keeping them safe from the bear, fighting off the bear, fighting off the predator.
Oh, I
And
read this.
it
Is this the one? Is this the
causes
one where
like
they?
it and causes like trans have become their baby. So they're very, very, very powerful, evolutionary gifted sense of primal protectiveness, that maternal protectiveness, that's being triggered because it would be triggered anyway at that age, at the time of your life, but it's been triggered. There's no baby there to protect. So it's been triggered by causes like climate and like trans. And it just makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
I know I'm going to disagree with you on this one. I think I read that. During the week, and I just thought it was load of nonsense.
Well, no, I think
Because no, I understand. That there's logic to it. There's logic to it, right? Because you've got the idea that women are maternal and women have this very powerful. We've talked about it on the podcast in terms of surrogacy. This very powerful drive to protect and care for their offspring. And if you imagine that that these causes become the substitute offspring, I mean, I think that makes sense. But then, of course, you can't say that and then also deride them as cat ladies who transfer all their affections and maternal affections onto their cats or their dogs. And it also ignores let me finish the point, Leisha. It also ignores the fact that female political activism is not a new thing that's developed in the last 30 years. I mean, when your woman was throwing herself under the king's horse for the right to vote, that was a very powerful form of female-led activism. If you look at the anti-war protests of the 60s, very heavily female-led. Like the idea that female political activism is or female left-wing instinct is just something that's emerged in the last 20 years because they're not having babies anymore. It just doesn't add up to me. It's the kind of
No, I
thing.
think
You get a lot of this on the intellectual dark web, as they call themselves, of lads who invent theories that sound smart but don't make a whole lot of sense. And that's
no, they're not. I mean, they're not the intellectual dark web. I mean, they are really, really eminent couple. Firstly, secondly, she's not saying this is the reason for all female-led activism. She's saying that the particular type we're seeing now, this is how she has hypothesized that this is the reason for it. Because for the first time, there's a whole generation of women just not having babies at all, and there is something, I don't know, there's something being triggered for sure, I think, when it comes to those issues. I definitely think the whole sense of, trans women being the most vulnerable in the world, that's triggering a conditioned sense of nurturing and protectiveness in women, because they are the most vociferous sort of advocates for that. Ironically, for the cohort who are out to take their rights and get into their spaces, But yeah, going back to what were we talking about before that, conservatism. Yeah, I think that the left has drifted so far to the hard left that if you are old left or centrist, you're seen as right. So everything is has shifted so much that it's for me, it's more about picking out issue by issue where you stand on that issue.
It's funny, because I think the political ground, people make out like the political ground has shifted. Like if you're standing on the center left 10 years ago, that basically the entire political spectrum has shifted so far left that you're now kind of on the center right, and everyone else has moved in the exact same direction. I don't think that's true, and I've got lived experience of it because, I've been a conservative for my entire adult life. My views on basically nothing in Ireland have changed. I mean, I don't know whether that's a sign that I'm a deep thinker who kind of got it right very early on, or that I'm ideologically inflexible. Take your pick. But 2002, when I was a student, I held mostly the same views that I hold now on most of the issues. I'm sure I've shifted here or there on one or two things. But what I find now is, and I'm the editor of the country's largest and arguably not only, but certainly largest conservative news, centre-right news platform. And one of the things that happens in my life all the time is I witness people who years ago were way over there on my left, who've suddenly whizzed past me, and are now the most rabid right-wing people you could ever meet, who are calling me a wuss. So that absolutely happens.
John, name them.
It wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be fair to name names. That wouldn't be fair. But some of them are some of them are pretty prominent. Eddie Hobbs, there, name Eddie Hobbs, because I'd say it to Eddie's face. Hey,
Yeah.
Eddie 10, 15 years ago was a relatively moderate establishment guy who was well to my left. Now he's like well over there to my right. I'm not saying that's illegitimate. I'm just saying that the idea that the political ground has shifted uniformly in one direction, I just don't think that's true at all.
But wasn't
I think what's happened is that everyone has shifted to the center ground has got a whole lot smaller. The shared spaces that we all enjoy, the things that we all agree on, that's got a whole lot smaller. I'd agree on that.
Well, I'm going to give you an example of what I'm trying to say. I went to mass recently and made a new friend, and this is a wonderful lady who was called to the bar the year I was born. And I have a big thing. I was very close to my nana growing up, and my parents went. I was a college baby, and they went back to finish their. Yeah, then my dad did a master's, and my mum finished up in UCD. So she minded me every day. So she was just very pivotal in my life. So I don't know why, I just really love kind of formidable older women, and I just love their energy, and I think they're our elders, and we've a lot to learn from them. So we just bonded with this woman. But she said to me, it's funny, I was talking to her about Maria Steen and her, running for the Oris. And she said, "Oh, I just don't agree with extremism." And I said, well, I was really taken aback. And I said, extremism? I mean, she just agrees with what the church says about abortion. And it just occurred to me that there's been a shift insofar as even people who go to mass every Sunday, a lot of them, and even women of her generation, were in agreement with the vote. But they're not. And then she said to me, and I was really taken back. And then she said, "Oh, but I just don't think it should be used, as contraceptive, and I think that's wrong." And so I think that sense of rare, whatever the talking point was. Sorry, I wasn't in the country at the time, but so that's a good example of people's normative values have shifted, but not as far as the new left think they have. Do you see what I mean? Like there's a flag in the sand quite often for lots of issues that have majority support, but what happens is the new left, the radical nihilistic new left, which is the noisy faction, just pushes that that flag off the edge of the cliff, and then we're left with surrogacy laws, with this cry for like more abortions. Somehow that's good. Like I don't think abortion is good for society or good for women. It's just that I suppose my empathy ends up marginally on one side of a conflict of rights. And it's one of those issues that is a conflict of rights, like trans, like so many of these trigger hair issues. So
Yeah, but I think sometimes people think about these issues though as if they're all one issue when they're not. I mean, I think you can talk about. I mean, the country is definitely undergoing a political change. I mean, attitudes on a whole range of issues are shifting. A lot of them are shifting in my direction for the first time in my life. But at the same time, on abortion, I think that if you were to rerun that 2018 referendum today and offer people the choice of staying with the law as it is now, or going back to what it was with the Eighth Amendment, and I mean, I'm somebody, by the way, who campaigned heavily, as you know, to keep the Eighth Amendment. I don't think I think the shift has probably been in the other direction on that issue. If I'm not saying I like that. I'm saying I think that's what's happened. Probably
really,
equally. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I
what
mean,
now?
I
Wait a
think
minute.
that
What are you actually saying? I'm saying that people do want, on the whole, very controlled access from a place of compassion. They do not want it to be a lifestyle, a contraceptive, etc., etc. No, sorry, this is what I was going to say. Like when I grew up in Ireland, if you were pro-choice, like I was, say, from my late teens, it was a bad thing that was occasionally justified, or sometimes justified. And if you were pro-life, it was a bad thing, obviously, that was never justified. But it was never a neutral thing or a good thing. And that's the key difference that the new left, the kind of propaganda the new left is telling us. Like we saw that during Kamala Harris's, the campaign. Oh, if Kamala gets in, I'm going to have loads of abortions, this kind of thing. There's a real coarsening around it. And I don't think that's representative of people's views at all.
Yeah, well, I think it was Ann Coulter who wrote about this 15 or 16 years ago. But she described abortion quite provocatively as a sacrament of the left. And I think there's elements of that. I mean, I think if you look at the recent presidential election, the litmus test for acceptability in the Irish media, the first question that literally every candidate who entered the race got, the first question was, "How did you vote?" in 2015 and 2018. So that is your litmus test of acceptability for entry into polite society. And if you disagree with either of those votes, you are a problematic human being. And to that extent, I think Ann Coulter is correct. And abortion has always represented, I think, for an awful lot of people who consider themselves on the left, it's whether they realize it or not, it's at the core of their value system. It is the thing for them that distinguishes them, and it's the litmus test they consciously apply to people, so that you could go and you could tell somebody who's of that disposition that, you know, if you lived in Britain, you'd vote for the Conservative Party, or that if you were American, you could see the appeal of Trump, or that, you know, you've recently taken up religion again. And they could cope with all those things. But if you told them that you thought about this a lot, you adopted the position of being absolutely pro-life, that is what would cause them to break their relationship with you or to put you into a whole new box. I think that's a massive issue. That's true, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's part of this is because everything's so polarized. Like until I did all this activism from 2020 onwards, I never would have really been around conservatives. And that doesn't mean that I've kind of changed my position. You see, people think that, oh, I can't talk to those people or hear what they have to say because I'm somehow going to lose my, as you say, kind of self-identify, how I view myself as I move through the world kind of ideas. But that's not what happens. What happened to me is that you meet people who are pro-life, but who you can see that they're coming at it from a good place. They don't just hate women. They just have a lot of empathy. They've landed on that side of the debate, and they have empathy for the unborn child. And it's heartfelt. Like it's not out of hatred for women or misogyny. But I think unless you have those conversations and are prepared to be triggered by people who otherwise you would very much respect intellectually on other issues, you're never going to get there in terms of not losing your core positions, but being more empathetic for other people's positions. Like a good example of this, and I know you want to talk about it, it's Herzog Park. Like you and I have discussed my views on Palestine before when I was running for the Senate, and you know, I've marched on pro-Palestinian marches. I've been I've gone very deep into the issue. You know, I didn't just start thinking about it and reading about it in October, and the events in the horrific events of October. It was more it's something I have I haven't done activism on it, but I've done a lot of thinking and reading for many decades. However, I was horrified that they were going to dename Herzog Park. So that's a good example of nuance, I suppose, you know, of going beyond the mere political and merely choosing a side.
We don't have time to talk about it in any detail. And anyway, I think Ben and Jason kind of covered it on their podcast. But I just want to say for our listeners that the thing that summed up Herzog Park for me was a spectacle of poor Sinead Gibney. Randomly, by the way, who was dressed in a curtain for some reason. I don't normally comment on female attire because it's not my place. But like she was, I don't know what the hell she was wearing. Now she's on The Week in Politics, and she's asked, but basically, like, the Jews who live in Dublin, they don't want the park renamed. They kind of like the name, because it's important to them. It's important to the Jewish community that's named after this guy. And Sinead Gibney goes on this spiel about how, like, well, of course, we will consult them on the new name. And so it's this position where she's like saying, the Jews, they can pick any name for their park except this one Jew that we don't like. No one cared who he was 5 minutes ago. You've decided that you ran it like this. So you Jews, you can have any name you want of any Jew. Just pick any Jew, just not this one. And then at the same time, they're kind of going, anti-Semitic? Us? What? How could anyone possibly think that? We just don't like this one particular Jewish guy. How the tin-earedness of that internationally is baffling to me. Even if you personally listen to this podcast and you go, no, John, but I know what they mean. They didn't want the guy who was involved in the Nakba or whatever you're calling it. Think about how that sounds internationally to the rest of the world, to regular Jewish people living in New York or living in London or living in Tel Aviv, wherever they are. Think how it sounds.
I have to say that as someone who is constantly defending my position and defending, the Irish position, as in the majority held position, which would be against the genocide, I think there's a sense that, like, I am constantly saying to people who are pro-Israel, no, we're not anti-Semitic at all. It is purely because we were a colony ourselves and we understand what occupation looks like, and we had a famine and there was a genocide and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like all of that, it makes me it makes me look like a liar and everyone else like me. And that's what was infuriating about it, because for me, taking that family's name from that park was, it just reeked of anti-Semitism. And also it's just bloody more student union politics. And you know what the worst of it is? Because I live in Rathgar. There's been a green light for development plans for that park to, it floods really badly, and there's plans basically to build a pathway around it, like just basic works that would be done in any other city in Europe. And I mean, that's 8 years later, it hasn't been done. So what is DCC doing? I mean, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, what they're mandated to do, like just stop the park filling with rainwater maybe and make it safe to walk around. No, speed, lightning speed, motions are tabled and moved. Like
I'm reminded of what my dear friend and colleague Laura Perrins wrote on Gript during the week, where she said that she had an idea to get lots of things built in Dublin really quickly. She said, if you want to build like the Dublin Metro really quickly, just tell Dublin City Council that they can name the stations after their pet causes. So you could have like, Palestine Station being connected to kind of Cuba Boulevard to whatever it is. And they might actually work to get it done. And I thought it was a fair suggestion. Look, our hour is up and we didn't get to talk about loads of stuff we were going to talk about. I mean, we didn't get to talk about poor old Vladimir Zelensky's visit at all. We didn't get to talk about my housing story at all. But you know what? It was a really engaging conversation, and I for one really enjoyed it, and I'm sure the listeners did too. And I hope you did, Leisha.
Yeah. I was in interviewee mode at the beginning, rather than
yes, yeah. Yeah, well, this is look. It does sometimes, especially when you come on and like you're replacing Sarah or whatever. It does kind of feel like you're here to be interviewed and tell me all your news and stuff. No, it is a conversation more than that. So look, we will leave it there. We'll be back next week with another surprise guest co-host. But for now, she's been Leisha, I've been John. This has been the week that really was. Hope you all have a great week and weekend, and we will see you soon. Take care.